Welcome to the Rant Live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Rant on Tuesday, November 23rd, 2021. And the Cubs did something. I mean, it's not really anything really worth mentioning. I mean, although we did write about it because they're just not really doing anything else, but they acquired outfielder Harold Ramirez from the Cleveland Indians, a very uninspiring signing, to say the least, from a guy who doesn't really do anything well.
Yeah, I mean, he's okay. He hits lefties fairly well. Plays okay defense. Like, we'll see what happens. I mean, it'll be. I guess I won't be surprised. I have to feel like this is a guy that they're going to try to sneak through waivers, right?
Yeah.
And you see him do this a lot because this puts the 40 man at 38. Like, if you've only got two, I got like a little hair hanging from the bill of my hat, right? So I'm like, shit's right in my vision. Anyway,
I don't have that problem.
Yeah, you're not wearing a hat, right? Is that what you mean? Oh no,
yeah,
no
exactly.
Hair. If you're saying, hey, we only got two more spots to add to the 40 man. That's kind of an uninspiring move to make to kind of shut down your flexibility. So again, I have to figure they're going to expose him to waivers, hope he clears, and then they can move him. They can put him at AAA, kind of stash him there as outfield depth. I mean, I think if we were talking about a team that had three or four, like three really good or four very solid outfielders, that you were like, hey, all you need is a backup to every once in a while come in there and play. But like, I don't know, man. Are you trusting in the trio of Ian Happ and Rafael Ortega and Jason Hayward, to be this juggernaut out there? I don't really think so. I mean, this is like a logical step down from those guys. If you're saying that's our,
I guess
that's our level, and then this is, we got to get below that.
I don't like to think of it that way, but
but like with Brendan Davis, unless something goes really wrong, he's surely going to be up with the big club at some point next season.
Yeah.
So again, I can understand that they're not trying to make any big moves. I just find this I find it odd unless they're just trying to use this as organizational depth and it's a kind of a procedural thing that they're working their way through. Unless Carter Hawkins saw something with this dude that he didn't let on to when he was with the Guardians, and then they were still the Indians, now the Guardians. And he's like, oh shit, Jed, you got to go get this guy. He's awesome. But I highly doubt that's actually what's going on.
Yeah. Doesn't feel like it. I'm sure there's something going on there, but anyways, the good news is it appears the Cubs are in on Steven Matz. I'm not sure exactly how serious they are. Apparently, according to John Heyman, they made an offer along with 7 other teams, being the Red Sox, Blue Jays, Tigers, Cards, Giants, Angels, and Mets. So my assumption is if the Cubs are in that mix, they're not going to win out. But because I can't imagine they made the best offer.
Yeah.
But it was the old PowerPoint, why you should come and join the Cubs, and the call from the inspirational call from one of the players or two of the players or something, trying to sell Wrigley Field and that type of stuff, probably, which worked in 2015 but doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, I struggle to think. And what's interesting though is that we saw, and these reports started to come out last night. But we saw, Alex Wood, and I don't know if there's been any further development, but Alex Wood was very close to re-signing with the Dodgers. Anthony DeSclafani re-signed with the Dodgers. We've seen there's another one. I'm trying to think of who else I just saw. But those guys they were projected to be, their evaluation-wise, they're thought to be right there at the same level as Matz, right? There's like John Gray is maybe slightly at the, we could say he's at the top of that same tier or maybe the very bottom of the next tier up, but they're all like in that same realm where you're looking at about
like a number 3, right?
Yeah, like 2 to 3 years, 9 to 12 million AAV. That's what we're looking at all these. And I think I think Wood was 2 or 3 years at 10 million was a year was really like that. That was that was a projection, and I think that was what the report is that he was signing for. DeSclafani got like 36 for 3, which was almost identical to what he was looking at. And if I said Dodgers, I apologize. It was the Giants on both of them. I thought I said Giants, but I may have goofed that up, or maybe somebody was just commenting to somebody else. I don't know. But anyway, those guys both with the Giants who lost Kevin Gossman, who's in the next highest, the highest tier, really outside of like the 1 year kind of funky guys like Verlander and Thor. So those high end guys on the very short term contracts, we're seeing them go for more money. These guys in kind of this middle ish tier, though, we're seeing them go for almost exactly or slightly less than what had been projected. And so somebody like Matz, who is in that same level, like 3 years, 27 to 30 million, that's super reasonable. Like even for a team like the Cubs, who you're saying, hey, they're going to be frugal, whatever. But somebody like that, then you look at Kikuchi from the Mariners. I'd like to say his name, Kikuchi, and Gray. Gray was maybe supposed to be a little bit more, but you figure, I mean, if they want to go after their pitching, if Matz is their guy, or if it's Gray, you can go out and find that guy for less than $40 million over 3 years. Pretty short. I really think then you could go out there and find, if you lock that guy in, you've got Miley, you've got Hendricks, you go out and you get your first guy on free agency, who look at as kind of a 2 to 3 year solid starter. Now you've also got your pick between Alec Mills, Adbert Alzolay, Justin Steele, Keegan Thompson. You could go and be a little riskier. Maybe it's a Michael Lorenzen, right, who's going to be pretty cheap, honestly. He's probably looking for a prove it. He wants to start. You might be able to go get the dude for like $6 million for a year. And you're like, hey, if it doesn't work out as a starter, we move you back to the bullpen where you've done fairly well in the past, or you've proven yourself and you got some of that velocity. There's your power arm. That's a little bit of a risk. It's spending intelligently if they can do it. And they can do all that for less than $30 million, or not less than 30 necessarily, less than 40 million overall, and probably 15 million a season. I think the market is there. I would be very surprised if the Cubs don't make some kind of a move before, if not Thanksgiving, then certainly before the CBA deadline. I mean, I think they absolutely add at least one pitcher, because that market is moving really quickly, and we're seeing these guys get snapped up. Teams are active in the market.
That kind of feels, I don't know if it's surprising or not. I mean, there've been a mix of deals too. It's not just like these low-level guys that are signing. I mean, there's been some big deals that have been signed, and some mid-level, low-level. I mean, it's all kinds of deals that are going. I'm surprised to see this much activity before the deadline. And the other part of it is that I haven't heard anything about the progression of the CBA talks, whether they're close to an agreement. I mean, we had some things come out, was it about a week ago? But I haven't really seen anything since. Have you?
No, not really. Although there's a couple of things there. I would say I'm not surprised by the pitching movement here for a couple of reasons. I know we had heard that there might be a couple of guys out there on the high end who were looking to sign. Corey Seager, I think, was one of them who might be looking to sign prior to December 1. But there was a lot of talk during the GM meetings, and this, internally, where both sides, the teams were kind of saying, hey, you might want to sign before this because there's going to be a lockout. You don't want to be left out in the cold. You don't want to have to go through this weird uncertainty of this compressed free agency period. And then a lot of the agents are telling teams, hey, you probably want to go ahead and get my guy. I think that's why we saw Thor Syndergaard get more money than maybe we thought he would have on that 1 year deal, right? You got a couple of those QO guys going pretty quick. We saw Erod go very quickly to the Tigers. So I think, teams are wanting to pounce, but so it doesn't surprise me. And then once those start falling, it's like when the first tight end gets drafted in your fantasy football draft, all of a sudden they all start going, right?
The first defense, the first kicker.
Yeah. Like it starts a run. And so as soon as those pitchers start going, you see a couple of the guys with qualifying offers, boom, 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 they all go. And then you start seeing these guys. Now we're kind of in that mid tier, as I mentioned. I think we see Matz is supposed to sign by Thanksgiving. I think we probably see John Gray's market heat up after that. And then you're going to start seeing a couple of those other guys come through. It'll just be very interesting. And there's a question in here, too, about Gossman and Robbie Ray. Well, Robbie Ray doesn't really matter. If I'm coming from a Cubs perspective, the Cubs aren't signing a pitcher with a qualifying offer attached. Gossman, I could see, but I mean, I think that dude could command maybe $125 million. I mean, I think he and Stroman are in that certainly the 9-figure range, and Gossman's expected to get even more than. Although Stroman, the numbers have gone back and forth where he's looking for like 25 a year over 5 to 6 years, which I think is definitely for my taste a bit much. Personally, I'm not as high as on Stroman as a lot of people are. Gossman I like a lot because I love that splitter. I think that thing will play, and he doesn't rely on not that Stroman relies on velocity, but Gossman's a guy who I think is going to age well based on the changes he's made. But I can ramble a little further if you want into the CBA thing. I don't want to get too far, but I literally just part of the reason I was a little bit late jumping on here was because I was finishing up a post about the Franco extension with the Rays and a couple of ways that I think that could signal some things about not necessarily what's in the negotiations themselves, because that to me is a different wrinkle. And I still believe, at least as firmly as I did last week, that there is a conspiracy afoot amongst the owners. But I do think that Franco deal might tell us a little bit about what ownership and the league is thinking in terms of what's going to be in the new CBA, by which, and I can get into more specifics if we so choose, but I think that's what we're
here for, dude. Specific away.
Well, we will. But I think the owners are very well aware, right? So, and this is what I said the last time. If you recall, my little conspiracy is that the league and the owners know full well that there's going to be a shift toward a more friendly player or player friendly, whatever way you want to put it. Some more player friendly developments in the CBA, be that for service time or free agency. I think some of those things are in there. I think there's a very good potential, I think, for a salary floor while there will probably be a cap, maybe something, as we talked about, that's more malleable than just saying, hey, it's a hard cap at $180 million and then you're done. I think they could incorporate something more similar to the NBA and NFL, kind of cut those both in there. But anyway, the reason I say that is because you've got a guy in Wander Franco. I like to just call him Wander. I like to wander with my thoughts.
Wander.
So that's where I go with that. But who's got like 300 total plate appearances as a professional, right? Half as he played 70 games. And he just got a 12-year deal for $185 million guaranteed. 223 it'll max out, but it blows out of the water. The biggest contract the Rays have ever done was 6 years, $100 million for Evan Longoria after the 2012 season. And I think he had gotten an extension in place early on, and one that was like really low, very, very team friendly, that the union kind of was pissed about. Then he kind of got on top of that. So overall, he was guaranteed like $136 million, but the extension itself was for $100 million. You've got Ronald Acuna Jr., who signed 8 years, $100 million extension to be the largest ever extension done by a player with less than a year of service time. So now Franco has destroyed both of those records. Largest contract ever for the Rays, largest contract ever for a first-year player, which would be very, very curious for a team that is historically frugal and right up in front of a new CBA. So why would the Rays do something like that so soon with less than 2 weeks? We got like 10 days before the CBA expires. Well, it's probably because the owners know that there are going to be some changes. There's probably going to be a salary floor. So the Rays, who are at about $91 million, or were at about $91 million toward currently the competitive balance tax calculations, that's the estimate for 22. Well, gee, they bump him from about a $600,000 rookie contract to $15.5 million or thereabouts, right? So that gets you above $100 million threshold. If we assume that that's maybe the theoretical floor, which I think is the number people have been looking at, or at least gets them close. Maybe it's 110 and they're very, very close to it. On the other front, there's going to be, we assume, some different calculations, some higher payments for players in their first 3 years of their rookie deals. And then we think there'll be a recalculation with the arbitration process, a change there, whether that's on, war calculations, whatever those figures are. But you have to assume that that's going to raise the payment for those players early on, right? So that they're kind of making up for, there'll probably be some service time changes, things like that. But if you look at a guy who's only 20 years old, first of all, we also probably know that there's no way in hell they're going with that 29.5-year bullshit that they were trying to figure out, which would have seen him have basically 10 years of control over a guy who came up when he was 20, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd never sign this contract if that was the case, right?
Right, because they would. The Rays would never, like, why would they do that when they're like, shit, dude, we could just keep you under control until you're 29, or almost 30. So I look at that and I think all these things the owners are putting out then publicly are all posturing. I continue to look at this and say they know it's going to move to that. And again, that goes back to how else would everybody be so convinced it's going to end in mid-February? It's because the owners already know they're going to concede some of this stuff. They already know that they're willing to move to some player-friendly options because, hey, at the end of the day, if you pay some of these young guys a little bit more, and as much as this looks like a huge deal, and it really is. I mean, it's great. Like, this dude's set up for life. It's awesome. But over that length of time, it's only $15.5 million. It's like $15.4 million AAV guaranteed.
Yeah.
Right. Even if he maxes it out, you're only talking about another $40 million over 12 years. Right. That's not even $4 million a year. It's like 3.5. So at most, he's at like 18, 19 million a year. That's fantastic. It's good for the team for those, the years 7 and beyond when he would normally have hit free agency. But I just look at this and I continue to say, I think the owners know damn well that that they're willing to concede some of these things, but they want to hold out. I think they want to try to strengthen their position as best they can. And I really do think, and it might be secondary, but I really believe, I mean, look at what we're talking about now. What did you just say? The market is a lot busier than you thought it would be. People are talking about it. People are talking about these signings. These big things are happening ahead of December 1st. We're getting this momentum at a time when college football hasn't hit bowl season yet. The NFL hasn't hit the playoffs. It's kind of a lull. The NFL's product looks like shit right now in general, especially if you're a Bears fan. And then they can ride it out. They wait till the bowls are done. They wait till the NFL playoffs are done. And then guess what? Oh, cool. We're good players. And the owners ride in on their white horse. And then they have this really busy free agency period right ahead of spring training. And bam, there you go. I truly believe that is a factor in what is going on here. And I really think the Franco deal, as much as anything, tells us that, because why else, the Rays of all teams, why else would the Rays make this move right now, even without knowing what the CBA is going to be? And that, again, I could be very wrong. I could just, I certainly have said some dumb shit before, and this might be another entry into that whole chapter. But
but so how many years did he have left on his rookie deal?
6. He'd only played 70 games.
So you've got to read something into that, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 3 years of arbitration and 3 pre-arb. Yeah, so I mean, not even close to a full. Well, I guess close, but 70 games. So they could have sat there forever.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly. I agree with you. I think there is something to read into this, and I think the good thing to read into it is that with all these deals happening, and with a deal like this happening, and as you indicate, this is probably a view into kind of what the owners think they're going to have to give up in the negotiations. They're probably a lot closer to coming to an agreement on the CBA than they're letting on, for maybe the reasons that you say, right? It's like, let's just kind of, let this go for a little while and try to get the best we can. But what are they really arguing over, to be honest with you? I mean, it's not like the owners have a bad deal going on right now. I mean, they're making tons of money. The value, I just saw the other day, what the Cubs were valued at like $4.2 billion.
That can't be through Forbes, though, is it? If it is, then they jumped a tremendous amount.
No, that wasn't through Forbes. That was through, God, what was that? There was, I think it was like some court case or something like, it's a Tribune. The whole Tribune thing.
Oh, but yeah, back to that one, because I think the
Tribune settlement.
Because there's definitely different valuations of them, because Forbes, I think, only has them at what, like 3.3, 3.5 only, right?
Yeah, it was a Tribune settlement with the IRS.
because that one I think was factored differently, and they took a few things into account. Because and that's the important thing to note too, is like where you look at those different, what those values take into account. Is it the land and the real estate holdings that they've got in addition to the team itself? Is it just the team? And I think Forbes I don't think they take into account like the rooftops and the,
I don't believe so.
The hotel and the office building and all that, because technically speaking, those are part of, marquee developments or whatever, a different enterprise owned by the Ricketts rather than the team itself. But I mean, either way, they're doing just fine in that regard, right? Like,
it's hard for them any owner to complain that they're not making enough money.
Well, yeah,
I mean, the small market teams are making plenty of money. I mean, look at the A's, look at the Rays. They're doing it well, and
well, the A's can't afford to pay a new manager. They couldn't even afford, like, they didn't want to pay Bob Melvin.
Well, they're cheap.
They had they're cheap. That's the thing. They can afford it. They're just super, super cheap. It's
thrifty.
wild.
Let's say thrifty.
Yeah, they are indeed thrifty. That is one. Although here's the funny thing: they're thrifty, the A's, that is, and yet they are reportedly exploring a $1 billion land purchase in the Las Vegas Valley. Can't pay Bob Melvin, can pay for $1 billion parcel of land in the middle of the desert to relocate. So
exactly, and that should tell you all you need to know about how much money the owners are making.
Operate this way, they just don't have. Okay, come on. Listen, $1 billion is a lot more than they'll ever spend in payroll on any, right? That's more than they'll spend on like 10 years of payroll. So don't tell me they can't afford to keep these players around. It is very much a choice that they're making when it comes to that. Like when you've got literal shit coming up through the pipes because your building is in such disrepair and you choose to not really do much about that, that's not because you can't. It's because you just don't want to, right? There's a massive difference there. So I think when people talk about the Cubs can't afford, and I always try to be careful with the words I choose, you see the Cubs can't afford to get someone, and there's a difference there. Jed Hoyer maybe can't afford to get someone because Jed Hoyer is not the one who makes the money in the decision. He's given the money. He's my kid. If I give him, here's $5, right? Go buy some candy. Well, I could go in there and buy more candy. My kid can't because I only gave him $5. And so Tom Ricketts could afford to spend more, but he's not giving Jed Hoyer that money all the time, right? So that I want to make sure we understand this and how this works.
Yes,
I know you do.
It's a tangled web we weave, isn't it?
It is. But I'm interested to see. And speaking of which, my understanding of that. So there was a report. I think it was over the weekend about the A's, and it was an undisclosed location. They said, but my understanding is it's like on the south side of Vegas. I think closer to Henderson. Like by where the Raiders have their complex, not where the football stadium is, but where the Raiders have their actual like practice complex. And there's some kind of typical suburbia type stuff out that way. So kind of makes sense. You get it away from some, and it's only 20 miles away from the Las Vegas ballpark, which is the home of the A's AAA team. So you'd have your AAA team just 20 miles away. Which I guess the A's, the way if they trade everybody off, they'll be a AAA team anyway. So, I mean, they might as well just go take over that ballpark and just let the team share it. But yeah, that would be an interesting development. But it's a matter of what these owners want to do. But it goes back to, you look at things like that. What are they seeing? What do they know? Look at the moves that are being made. I think if teams were really scared about what's going on in the CBA, or that it would be locked out, all this, or that we'd have a really prolonged work stoppage, I don't know that they'd really be falling over themselves to kind of lock these guys up. I really think the belief out there is that we're going to have a full season. Things are going to get done. And I think there's part of it where I'm not saying the owners feel bad for the players. That's not the case. But I think there's a knowledge out there, and I think there's enough belief among the fans. There's enough noise being made about free agency and about rookie service time and stuff like that, that I think there's an acknowledgement that some of that stuff has to change. And so I do think we'll see that. Oh, it still cracks me up. I go back to this every time I see it, like what the owner's saying, 29.5 as the service, so again, depending on where your July 1st birthday, being a cutoff,
It's
that's
like
why it's
Little
a
League.
half year. But it's just like to say, well, that means they'll all get at least one shot at free agency in their 20s. Like, being 29 is not in your 20s anymore. Like, you'll be 30 the next year.
It's basically, but I mean, it's what Chris Bryant's dealing with, right?
Yeah, and that's because, right, he had 7 years under the initial setup, right, because he was a Super 2 player, and again, it's that kind of service time manipulation. Now, what I could see, and I don't remember if you and I were having this conversation last time, as you said, if they had something that says it's 29.5 or 6 years of service, whichever comes first. And so, if you are somebody who came up a little bit later, and you went to college and maybe you were a late bloomer, Jacob deGrom or something like that, right? You come up, you're 26 years old. Well, hey, you're only under your rookie deal for 3 years, and then you get to go.
I think the players would agree to that. I don't think the owners would.
They might not. No, not for somebody who's really good. Obviously they'd want to hold on to him, but on the flip side of that, you get some of those young guys, like obviously they'd want to have that. But I think there has to be, if you have a hard age cap on there, because you got some guys, although it'll balance, right? If it was just a hard cap at 29.5, well, there's some dudes who are going to hit free agency in 2 years, like Patrick Wisdom and Frank Schwindel they're already free agents. But then you look at these guys on the flip side, your Juan Soto's and your Francos and guys like that who came up when they were 20, who are going to be controlled for 9 to 10 years. And there's no way that's going to be something that works out. I mean, unless you're getting a $200 million extension, before you hit 21 years old. So that would be amenable to the players. And I think the teams actually like it because they get that guy locked in. But I think it's got to be just like the cap, right? You can have a cap, but then there has to be some sort of like in the NBA, you've got the Larry Bird exemption where you can re-sign your own player to like a supermax deal, and that doesn't all count toward it. Or the NFL, the cap number itself fluctuates based on revenue. And so that will help the players to maintain a certain share of the revenue level. I think there are some things about it that could be factored in that makes sense. And players do not like the idea of a cap, certainly. So it can't just be a hard number. But I do think if you offset that with a salary floor that forces teams like the Rays, the A's, others like that to actually spend money on players, I mean, that to me, that's where it's best for those mid-level guys who aren't going to get those monster contracts. But guess what? If you're that dude who hangs out for a while and, oh shit, the A's need to bump their salary floor, they need to pay some guys to bump that floor up a little bit, well then, maybe you're that dude who gets caught, you get your Tyler Chatwood deal and you're getting paid way more money than you probably actually deserve, because the team's got to get above that floor. And that's,
you don't think that just motivates them to spend, to go out and sign more free agents? You think they just turn around and pay the guys they've got more?
They could. I mean, that could be an extension that they give to a guy. But I think it's one of those where you're like, hey, if we're at 95 million and or 90 million, and we got to go get something. Hey, dude, how about $10 million for a year? For a guy who's maybe looking at maybe getting a league minimum or barely hanging on to even a minor league deal. I'm exaggerating just for the purposes of like kind of making an example there, but
no, I'm taking that at your word. Every single thing you said.
I mean, I
am Facebook.
Yeah, exactly. We broadcast live on Facebook, so I want to make sure that I'm very clear about some of these things that are coming across. But no, I mean, if you offset that, you have a little spending. Now the problem is if you bring that up, and there's very few teams that are actually under that $100 million threshold, right? So then that could be like, oh, well, we'll put in a floor, and then but we got to have the ceiling. But it's like, well, you already have the floor. You don't need to bring the cap way down, like by $30 million. That doesn't make any sense. Now, the idea is that it should create more parity because teams are operating within, less of a, I guess to now be redundant, less of a disparity in terms of the upper and lower thresholds of spending. But, I think you do need to have that in there and be able to again, have carve outs so guys can pay more money to their own players, right? And have a little bit more freedom to re-sign or extend their own guys, whether it be
If they do something
under the
like
rookie
that, though,
deals or whatever.
if they put a
I think they
floor in,
could.
would they have to put a higher level of revenue share in for those lower market teams?
I mean, I think those lower market teams are doing pretty freaking well as it is. Like if they're spending under $100 million, they're making back so much more money. I mean, I think that's, to me, that's like a bare minimum requirement that they should have to be able to spend $100 million. And they're still, I think they're still, again, if the A's can go out and shop for $1 billion parcel of land, and I totally understand these are different buckets, right? They don't necessarily come out of it in the way that you would purchase real estate. I'm sure it's under a different, right? It's not as if they're saying, oh, well, rather than pay these players, we're going to go buy land. But you go a few years without paying players very much, you got a whole hell of a lot of money socked away to go buy some land. But it's I think it's a matter of them, the owners, looking at this and saying, hey, how do we fool the players into making them think we're going to spend more money on them when in fact we're keeping this pool the same way. But if you at least have those, I think what players object to more than anything is the concept of a cap, because theoretically it should limit the amount of money that they can earn as a collective, right? That cuts that down. And so any kind of a cap that would reduce potential earning power, even if it's kind of offset by a floor that should raise, the floor should raise earning power for the guys at the middle to the bottom. And then, having no cap is obviously going to help the guys at the top. So if you have both of them in place, and if you kind of soften the top, then I think you should arrive at a level where everybody can at least theoretically be happy. Now, whether or not owners on the whole actually seek to utilize the mechanisms, to kind of spend more at the top end, I don't know.
Yeah, I kind of feel like coming into these CBA negotiations, and based off the last few negotiations that occurred, like there's a general sentiment that the owners have kind of pulled one over on the players, and the players have kind of ended up in this bad situation with the CBA. And so perhaps it behooves the owners to maybe take a step back on this one. And they certainly did that on the last CBA. I think they kind of punted on the last CBA. And so perhaps it behooves them to while there are certainly some big topics out there that they could make part of the conversation, maybe it's just in the interest of everybody to kind of get a deal done, get a deal agreed to. If they want to do the lockout and shorten the free agency period and make it a little bit more exciting, as you've mentioned, go ahead and do that. Maybe get something in place in January, or maybe late January, something like that, so that, I would say the owners really need to kind of come out. They should try to come out of this with a little bit of goodwill.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's their other, right? They're always, as much as they're wanting to keep as much of their money or kind of keep themselves in a better financial position in general, they are also constantly waging a PR battle. And
winning that PR battle.
Yeah, it's not even much of a battle. It's a pretty pitched battle, if anything. Which I guess is a good pun since it's a baseball conversation. But because they're the ones out there saying, hey, here's what our proposal was. Here's some information on this. And it leaks out a little bit at a time, right? So it kind of comes out. And I don't know if this was intentional, but when we first heard, or at least when I first heard, they were going to try to base, change the arbitration system to base it on an algorithm, period. And that's what we heard. I was like, that is the dumbest shit I've ever heard. How could you possibly do that? And then it was like, well, it'll actually be on WAR. And I was like, okay, this is still really stupid because that's way too narrow. It was like, well, then there'll be these escalators and other things in there, and it'll be a factor of this many dollars times your career WAR, and then that number will go up each time. And I'm like, like, I still don't love it, but it starts to, you're looking at it and like, okay, it's kind of a meritocracy at this point. It's something that you can look at. Now, does it adversely impact relievers and other guys? Yes. So there would have to be maybe some tweaks, some different things that you'd have to figure out in there. But I just think
It seems overly complicated. Like what does it really solve at the end of the day versus the complications it introduces to the whole process?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely different. I mean, I think part of it's just there's no more you file here, we file here. Then there's a potential to go down in front of an arbitrator, and to use a lot of them what we would consider to be more antiquated numbers, counting stats and that sort of thing. And you're looking at, hey, here's an algorithm that takes into account defense and offense, and kind of eliminates some park factor, and kind of universalizes this and say, hey,
I'm not sure what the arbitration process, why they would think the arbitration process is broke unless they feel like they're losing all the time.
Well, the owners generally aren't losing very. I mean, how many times, like, people don't often go to arbitration. The players don't really like it, but the players also don't want to give up the control over at least being able to, right? Because if there is arbitration, at least I can file at a certain number. They might end up settling, which they generally do.
Yeah.
But at least they can file. Whereas this would replace that. I think that's part of where, and of course, owners can much more easily, and teams can much more easily, I should say, manipulate a player's WAR than the player can. I mean, the player can't just go like, I'm going to hit 5 home runs today. You know what I mean? Like, you can't decide to go hit all these home runs and to be better. You could certainly try to be better. But, I mean, what's to stop an owner from, if they're looking at it and being like, oh, well, hey, this guy's a really good defensive player, but we've got a young guy who's not arbitration eligible yet, or it is his first 3 years, who's at least as good a defender. And so let's say Jason Hayward. Let's just throw that out there. It's a bad example because he's under contract, but let's say it's a player like that before he signed his big deal with the Cubs. All right, let's say he's still with Atlanta, or he's with the Cardinals or whatever. I guess not the Cardinals. It would have been Atlanta. Really good defender, and at the time his offense was considered to be pretty good. But what if they had a young kid coming up who was a rookie who was just as good a defender, and now we're talking about a National League with the DH in place? Hey, we're going to DH Hayward today. So his offensive numbers are going to be fine, but he's not going to accumulate anything defensively. You know what I mean? Or maybe you replace him at right field late, and you swap him out more frequently when there's
it's just that whole.
So you could manipulate that.
The whole system can be gamed just
I don't like
too
that.
much, and it's overly complicated too. It's just I agree.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any way that gets into the CBA or anything like it.
Well, I could see some, but if they were to do it, it would have to be something that the players believe guarantees them a better shot at more money early. And I think part of this here's the other part of that too, is that we see that it's like, oh, based on WAR, but at the same time, like they said, hey, it's gonna the first year salaries are gonna increase to like 600 some, and then it'd go up to 700 some and whatever, and then if you make all MLB in one of those years, and your base salary goes up to $2.5 million instead. So there would be ways for those young players to earn more money earlier. And I think on this one, I think what they were trying to look for also is to kind of universalize things to a greater extent. Again, it'd be like $580,000 times your career WAR, your first time eligible. Then it's like 750,000 times, and then 910,000 times. So if you're a player like Franco, who got 2.5, and this is F-WAR, it's the Fangraphs WAR. He got 2.5 F-WAR over 70 games. So I mean, you're talking about a dude like that's a 5 WAR player minimum, right? If he 6 WAR, if he plays a full season, so you go 3 seasons of that. Now you're at 18 WAR times $580,000, right? So you could be making some pretty decent money your first time through, and your second and your third. But again, the owners want it because it's more control. The players wouldn't want it because it's less control. But again, I think there would be some change. There will be some changes to that arbitration process, one way or the other.
What I'm hopeful is that if there is a lockout, that we at least learn the key sticking points. And I think right now we're just speculating on what we think they're going to be based on the rumors that we've heard. But hopefully we actually get some real factual information about what the sticking points are. And then at least we'll have something to talk about there. Finishing off our show here, I want to talk about Miguel Amaya apparently needing Tommy John surgery. I don't think they've they've officially said he needs Tommy John surgery, but they said it looks like he's going to need Tommy John surgery, which is a big, huge bummer because it's like, did they delay making the decision? Did they try to rehab him and just couldn't get him there? And it just seems like it kind of stretched on because he's been out for a while.
Yeah, I mean, he only played through May, so he missed most of the season. I think he had 109 plate appearances, and you got to remember, so he missed all of 2020, or he didn't play any actual games, any professional games for the Cubs in 2020. 109 plate appearances this year, will not have any plate appearances next year. So you're talking about the guy who at one point was your number one prospect, who's 3 to 5 in there, and who will now have the equivalent of a month or so of experience over 3 whole years.
Yeah.
I mean, there's development that takes place in there, but it's a big setback. Now he'll have, it's concerning. I'm guessing it was one of those things where we very, very rarely see full disclosures of injuries to minor leaguers. So they explained it as forearm tightness, which again is generally a precursor or a euphemism for some kind of UCL, the ulnar collateral ligament, which is again what we're talking about when we have Tommy John surgery, right? It's an elbow reconstruction. And so my guess is that there was probably a partial tear of some sort, and they were hoping maybe he did some PRP therapy, which would be the platelet-rich plasma. They take out your blood, they spin it, they get the plasma, inject it back in, and it can help with healing. I mean, Nolan Ryan had a partially torn UCL. He just let the thing scar over, and he pitched for like 10 more years, and it worked. But Nolan Ryan's a freak. So again, my guess is that they were hoping that rest and rehab would get it back to the right spot, and whether that just didn't work or whether he did something else to exacerbate it, I don't know. I'm sure we'll find out at some point in the future, but sounds like he's going to have surgery here coming up, and then it's going to be rehab, but you're basically looking at missing a year, and that's tough, man. But that also changes the Cubs course, because
I know.
I don't think what do you do now? You can't trade Wilson Contreras and be like, hey, we got Miguel Amaya waiting in the wings, because you don't. And you don't know what you're going to have in this guy. And my biggest concern with him is that the biggest developmental need that he had was to be much more consistent at the plate, not so much behind it. Dude can call games like nobody's business. He's defensively, he's a great catcher. But now with that little experience, with that little work, and only at the AA level, which is still good. I mean, it's fine, only. I am just very concerned for what this means. But he's still only going to be 23 in March. So I guess we got to consider that too. Wilson Contreras was 24 when he debuted. So Amaya could sit out the whole year, bust his ass, rehab it, somehow make the roster at the start of the 2023 season. He would still be younger than Wilson Contreras was when he began his career with the Cubs.
Well, the problem with Amaya, though, is he still needed development.
Right.
So this isn't a guy who was like MLB ready. And so if he was, then you could take the approach that you're talking about. But where you've got, I just think the Cubs have to re-sign Wilson Contreras. I think they've got no other prospects.
Pablo Aliendo is the only other. He's down like at number 27. But I mean, you're talking about a young guy at A-ball who's not going to be ready for another 3 years.
Yeah,
so they do not have anybody out there. I mean, unless they're going to go, full on replacement route and just get a bunch of backups in the meantime, but they do not have anybody coming up through the system at this point until 2023 at the very earliest. Unless we're talking about your Tyler Paynes and guys like that, who's again 29-year-old, not really a prospect anymore. It's concerning to say the least, and it sucks, but that's where I guess, and I'll take this to the next one. So I wrote earlier about, hey, the Cubs in the pitching market and trying to have to jump on that. And, a couple of people were like, well, why would they go? I thought they were supposed to be developing pitchers. What happened to that? Well, I think as we see here, if you base your future solely on a guy who's still at the lower to mid-level of the minors, who hasn't consistently proven himself yet, and if you're going to start making big moves and place the future of your franchise on that, you run the risk of things like this happening. So, like if the Cubs had traded, let's say they thought, Amaya will be fine. It'll be good. We're going to trade Contreras. We're going to count on this dude for our future. And what if he never makes it back now? You know what I mean? There's no guarantee. He should be. I mean, elbow reconstruction is like, it's a breeze now relative to what it used to be. These guys come back from it just as good as ever. And the rehab process is very dialed in. And he's not a pitcher, so that's helpful. But, it is difficult because you start looking at these dudes and you got to remember, for every one of them that hits, there's like 15 or 20 of them that don't. And so you got to
go the Dodgers.
Yeah. Oh, and then everybody who you call up is awesome. Or the Cardinals, who just randomly will, pull up freaking Lars Nootbaar, and he's all like that. I still refuse to believe that's an actual person. But yeah, that's why you go out and you sign, especially if you can go get 2 pitchers for $40 million combined, $50 million, or if you get one for 3 years and maybe you go out, maybe Carlos Rodon, or again, like I said, I keep wanting to call him Jared Lorenzen, the hefty lefty Pillsbury throw boy, former quarterback from Kentucky, but it's Michael Lorenzen, and Cincinnati's close to Kentucky, so that's maybe why, but I think it's just the last name. But you get a guy like that on a 1-year deal. There's no such thing as a bad 1-year deal. Pay him more money than they normally would have. Get him to come there for a year, and then if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Who cares? You move on, and now you still got a spot open. But I think we should know better than to consistently try to trust that the Cubs are going to suddenly have like 3 pitchers in the starting rotation that'll work it all out. So,
yep.
Oh well.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. So we've got Thanksgiving this week. I'm going to be trying to go to Florida, but I'm not sure if that's going to work out or not. But you hanging out around the family, around home, or?
Yeah, my sister and brother-in-law and their kids just moved up. They're about 20 minutes from us, so we're going to hang out there. Nice. Makes it easy. Yeah, we're going to go hang out and prep for stuff. My brother-in-law and I are going to smoke a turkey breast on the big green egg and have fun with that. So that'll be nice. Family's coming in. I'm kind of hoping I have to get up really early to smoke the bird, and that I eat a bunch of food and get really just pass out, and I won't have to watch the Bears. That's really my goal at the end of the day. I don't feel like
they played Detroit, though.
Yeah, well,
there's hope.
They just played a Ravens team that was missing like every single one of their top starters.
The Ravens are a mess. They never should have lost that game.
They didn't have anybody. The only thing I want them to lose is Matt Nagy
and
Ryan Pace.
Which hopefully they do. Yeah, I don't know. Ryan Pace it doesn't bother me as much, but definitely Matt Nagy does. Pace is a good drafter guy. He's done well there. He just hasn't done well in terms of what he's done with
literally anything else.
Yeah, literally anything else. So anyways, have a good Thanksgiving. Say hi to your family for me.
I will. You do the same. Enjoy your travels as to the extent that is possible.
Yes, yeah, we'll see how that works out. But either way, everybody else have a happy Thanksgiving, and we'll circle back with you guys next week.
Cool. See you, everybody. Have a good one.
Yep.
Happy Thanksgiving.